Then I will be Lane, Mrs. Lane. It's always wise to have a name as much like one's own as possible. And Mrs. Lane, wife of a gentleman in the East India Company, sounds eminently respectable. What I will do first thing tomorrow morning is to tell the adjutant to inform Lady Critchley that he has found exactly the right person to look after her grandchild. They will not be able to see you until you are on board, as there is so little time before the ship sails the day before tomorrow. So soon, Orissa exclaimed, but she was not complaining. I will give you your fare to Tilbury, Charles continued, and all you have to do is get yourself there. The adjutant will tell the ship agents that you are to be one of the passengers. And of course, the general will arrange the cabin and all that sort of thing. Oh, Charles, it is all too wonderful to be true, Orissa cried. I hate to mention it, Orissa said, but I shall have to have some money. After all, there will be the train fare from Bombay to Delhi. I don't suppose the general will pay that. He will not pay a penny more than he has to. You can be sure of that. I will let you have what I can. But as I have already told you, it's not easy. I hate to be a drag on you, Orissa said softly. To tell the truth, I am feeling rather guilty that I have not done something about you before. I knew things were bad at home, but not as bad as they are. It doesn't matter now. Nothing matters. Orissa smiled. As long as I can get away and be with Uncle Henry and in India. Her brother, seeing her face radiant in the light of the flames, thought that she was unlikely to be on her uncle's hands for long. He hadn't seen his sister for 2 years, and he was astounded by the difference those years had made. From being rather a thin, scraggy little girl, she had grown into a strangely beautiful young woman. She was not, he thought, like anyone else he had ever seen, and there was in fact something almost Eastern in the darkness of her hair and the mystery of her huge eyes. Do you know, Orissa? He said, following the train of his thoughts. You might almost pass as a Rajput princess. You could not pay me a bigger compliment, Orissa answered. In my dreams, I am always a part of India. I never belong to the cold and misery that I have found here. She paused and added, England has never been home to me. Home was being with Mama. So, when you talk of going home, you mean India? When I return to India, I shall be home. Charles laughed affectionately. Well, as long as you're happy, I'll be able to go off to Egypt with a clear conscience. Orissa gave a quick sigh as if she just remembered the danger he would be in. If only you were coming with me. I do not suppose it will be long before I'm back with the regiment. We have sent an Indian force to Egypt. They should be disembarking now at Port Said. I shall join up with them as soon as I arrive. There was an enthusiasm in his voice which told Orissa he was looking forward to what lay ahead. Charles had always loved his regimental duties and had always been a success. He was 6 years older than she was, and she had adored him ever since she had been a small child. Orissa moved quietly about the cabin so as not to disturb the sleeping child. He had been excited during the railway journey to Tilbury, and when his grandmother brought him on board, he ran wildly about the ship, thrilled by everything he saw. She could hardly believe it was true. All the obstacles seems to have dispersed and she was really starting on her journey to India. There had, as it happened, been quite a number of things to worry about. The first had been getting away from Charles' lodgings early in the morning. Saying goodbye to her brother, she hurried downstairs. The gas lights had been extinguished, and as there was still very little light outside, the stairs were dark. So she held tightly onto the banisters in case she should trip. The place seemed very quiet. It was only when she reached the first door that one of the doors opened and a man emerged. With a frightened leap of her heart, Orissa knew it was Major Meredith. It was too late for her to go back up the stairs again, and the only thing was to hurry past, hoping he wouldn't see her face. At the same time, she couldn't help glancing at him, and she thought that even in the half light, she could distinguish a look of contempt in his eyes. She ran on and hurried down the next flights of stairs with a speed that made it appear that all the hounds of the hill were at her heels. She had thought, when she returned the previous day, that the Countess was slightly shamefaced, feeling perhaps that in turning Orissa out of the house, she had for once gone too far. Then neither of them referred to the fact that Orissa had been away all night. But it was obvious that the Countess was on the defensive when Charles arrived. He had walked away from the Countess to find his father in the small sitting room at the back of the house, where he sat and drank. For once, the Earl was comparatively sober, and when he said goodbye to Orissa, Orissa felt he was genuinely sorry to lose her, because he felt generous, or perhaps because he was ashamed of his wife's behavior. He gave Orissa £5. This she accepted gratefully. Take care of yourself, Charles said, as standing in the station, she gave him a last wave of her hand. She turned and followed a porter who had put her baggage on a truck. Then to the cab driver he said, "Take me to Wellington Barracks." As the cab drove away, his thoughts were of himself and the journey he in his turn would be undertaking within a few days. It was only when she had gone on board that Orissa remembered she had not reminded Charles to send a telegram to her uncle after the ship sailed. Charles, despite his proverbial bad memory, couldn't forget anything so important. Then she forgot her worries, anxieties, and everything else in the joy of knowing that the great adventure had begun. She took care to look demure, and she hoped very respectable when the General and Lady Critchley came on board, and a steward was sent to bring her to their cabin. The black-hulled Dorinda, a full-rigged, four-masted screw-propelled ship, was one of the latest vessels on the run to India. Orissa had hardly been on the boat for 10 minutes before a steward explained with pride that the engine were of a novel and exceptionally economical type, and that her full boiler power drove her at 15 knots in her trial runs in the Clyde. What Orissa found more interesting were the passenger arrangements, which were quite different from those on the ship in which she had travelled back from India 6 years earlier. In the long covered space under the spar deck, there were on each side two rows of the first class cabins with berths for the 95 passengers. The stateroom, of which she and her charge occupied one, were fitted so that the upper berth folded out of the way and the lower berth divided into two, sliding aside into seats so that a table could be placed between them. In this way, a cabin which measured 9 by 6 inches could become a sitting room in the daytime. The public saloons were very spacious and impressive, extending from side to side of the Citadel House. There are sufficient center and side tables in the dining saloon, a steward told Orissa proudly, to dine 100 passengers. What was far more sensational was that the ship was lit at night by incandescent electric lights. Beside this wonder, there was an organ, an excellent piano. What delighted Orissa, an elegantly carved bookcase containing 300 volumes. It is a very big ship, little Lyle kept saying to her after she had taken him into her charge, and she had to agree that it was indeed a big ship, the biggest she had ever seen. Standing at the rail on the first class deck to watch the late arrivals come on board, Orissa noticed there was quite a number of soldiers climbing up the gangway onto the third class deck, their kit bags hunched on their shoulders.